Second job.
I see. And about when would that have been?
That was like September of 1982.
As you dated, did you come to know his family as well?
Yes.
Where was Greg born and raised?
Brunswick.
How long did the two of you date?
About 10 months.
Now I want you to see in front of you on your right, there's a group of things. There we go. So first I'm going to ask you some questions about them, and if we keep them in that order, it might go smoothly. I want you to take a look at Defendant's Exhibit number 9. What is that?
Yes. Our wedding.
That is your wedding? And where were you married?
We were married at St. Mark's Episcopal Church in Brunswick.
Here in Brunswick? Your Honor, I tender Defendant's Exhibit number 9.
No objection.
So your wedding date, August 20th, 1983?
82. 83, I'm sorry.
83, that's all right. Is that the case then, Ms. McMichael, that this August you celebrated your 37th wedding anniversary?
It is.
And that would have taken place while your husband was at the Glynn County Jail?
It did.
Do the two of you have children?
We do.
I want you to turn now to Defendant's Exhibit number 10 and tell us if you know what's in that photograph.
That's our family, and there's Lindsay and Travis and Greg.
Your Honor, I tender Defendant's Exhibit 10.
No objection.
And if you are able to see there, the photographs are being shown as well, but the ones that you have there are probably a little easier to see, okay? So in that photograph, that looks like a young McMichael family. About how old is everyone there?
Travis was probably about 8 or 9, maybe 10. Lindsay was 5. Golly, I can't remember how it was, about 40. Maybe.
All right.
35, and Greg about 39.
You testified earlier that Lindsay is how old?
She's 30.
And that she is a student right now living at home with you.
She is.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Are you able to?
I was able to see, and let me address this. Yeah, I just noticed they're coming up there. I was able to see them on my screen before.
Oh, could we try to get that
Well, is
correct?
Tan the only one you can see now?
It's not coming up on my screen.
Oh, so you're not seeing
No,
anything?
I did see the previous ones that were coming up.
Did you?
No, I didn't change anything.
Yeah, I mean, I can see them from here. Again, I took a look through most of each, all of the documents before, so I can see what's up on the large screen from here.
You can see them up there now.
Yeah, I can see it on the large screen. If there's something I can't see or I have a question about, I'll stop.
Thank you. All right, so I can't recall, did I tender number 10?
I don't know that you did. If not, I have no objection to it.
Thank you.
It's significant because not all of them.
Thank you, Your Honor. So when you met your husband, Greg McMichael, he was in the law enforcement career. Do you know what drove him to pick a career in that field?
Well, he liked law. He liked working with people.
And again, I feel like you're a little too far from that mic.
He likes law, and he likes working with people.
Did you sense that he liked the power of strapping on a gun and being in charge?
No, ma'am.
Do you think he pursued that field because of money?
No, ma'am.
Right. Has your husband ever shot anyone?
No, ma'am.
You say that very quickly. Is that important to Greg McMichael?
It is very important to him.
Why do you think that's important to him as a law enforcement officer, never to have shot anyone?
Because there's been so many opportunities that he did not have to use it. He did not have to use his gun.
Would you say that that's a relief to him?
That is.
When Greg McMichael was working in the Brunswick Police Department and the Glynn County Police Department as well, both. Do you understand that he worked with a diverse group of colleagues, men, women, people who had money, people who didn't, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, all sorts of diverse people.
Yes, ma'am.
And are you aware of whether there has ever been a single complaint from a colleague about Greg McMichael having mistreated him or her as a result of the diversity in that office?
No, ma'am, no complaints.
Are you aware if there's ever been any internal affair or personnel investigation against him for him having mistreated anyone of a colleague?
No, ma'am.
Now, as a police officer, he is helping a diverse group of citizens in Brunswick. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
People, white, black, young, old, poor, rich. Are you aware of whether there's ever been a single problem that's been lodged or complaint that's been lodged against Greg McMichael in all those years of public service for him having mistreated a member of the public?
No, ma'am.
Has there ever been an internal complaint that had to be investigated?
No, ma'am.
Has he ever had to appear before any internal investigation board for such a thing?
No, ma'am.
And one more time, at the district attorney's office, he had colleagues that were diverse. He dealt with a public, witnesses, suspects, victims who were diverse. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you aware of there ever having been a single complaint lodged against Greg McMichael to his boss, to the courthouse, to Glynn County personnel that he had mistreated a member at the district attorney's office?
No, ma'am.
How about having mistreated any member of the public while he was a DA investigator?
No, ma'am.
Does your husband have a motto about how he intends to treat everyone?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you state that for us?
He always believed to treat people how you want to be treated, to treat people with respect.
Did that matter who the person was he was dealing with?
And it did not matter who it was.
Did it matter if it was a witness or a victim or a suspect?
It didn't matter.
Did it matter as far as you understood whether the person he was dealing with was white or black or brown?
It doesn't matter.
In 2019, Greg retired from public service, is that right?
Yes.
Do you know why?
His health.
Generally, what the problem was?
Well, he's had 2 heart attacks and a total hip, and he was just ready to retire.
As his wife and as a nurse yourself, do you understand that your husband has significant health issues that
Yes.
must be addressed?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
When Greg McMichael was not in custody, was he diligent about maintaining his medical protocol so as to stay alive?
Because of me, yeah.
Okay. Would you ever tell him, hey, Greg, it's time for an appointment, and he'd say, forget it, Lee, I'm not up for it?
No, he would not.
Do you know right now of any physicians, any specialists that he should have been and needs to continue to see on a regular basis?
His cardiologist, gastroenterologist, and we need to do a follow-up on a neurologist.
I want to show you, if you take a look at Defendant's Exhibit number 11. Do you see that photograph?
I do.
Do you recognize it?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, I tender Defendant's Exhibit 11.
No objection.
What is that a picture of?
That's of Greg holding a couple of fish.
What were Greg's plans, the plans that you all had together for him after his retirement?
He had planned to get his captain's license and do ecological tours and history via boat.
Was he qualified to do such a thing?
He was.
Do you know how he earned that kind of qualification?
Well, he worked with the Department of Natural Resources forever. That's how he learned how to do the boat. He also took the test for his captain's license.
I want to turn your attention to the Department of Natural Resources. If you would look in there, should be an Exhibit 22, a piece of paper maybe at the back side.
There it is.
All right. Do you see what that is?
Yes, ma'am.
Who is that letter from?
Glenn County Board of Commission,
Oh, not that one. Is that Exhibit 22?
that's 21.
All right.
I don't see the 22.
We'll put it up, well. All right, well,
Wait a minute, here it is.
Find it? Okay.
Yes, ma'am, I do.
All right, very good. And who is that letter written by?
By Mr. Jim Music.
Do you know Mr. Music?
I do know Mr. Music.
How do you know him?
He worked with Greg at the Department of Natural Resources.
What did the two of them do together?
I think that Jim was a biologist, and Greg worked on the research vessel.
When he worked on the research vessel, Greg, I mean, where did his research vessel go?
To different places, different islands.
And were there any islands that vessel went to that you're familiar with?
Sapelo.
So was there a full circle that surprised you when you all met?
Yes, there was.
What was he doing at Sapelo?
You mean when he working?
Yes.
I'm not sure if he was probably doing research on dragging nets for shrimp and that kind of thing for the research vessel.
When you and Greg would discuss his memories of his time at Sapelo, how would he describe that time?
He enjoyed it. They would meet up at the dock and spend the night, spend weekends over there, play football, just hang out at Sapelo, with the people and everything.
Do you know why Jim Music isn't here today and had to
Yes.
write a letter?
Yes, I do.
Can you tell us why?
Because he's hunting.
Okay. Was it a already planned trip
Yes, it was.
out of state?
Out of state.
All right. Prepaid is what I heard. So I'd like now for us to take you back, and I want to talk about some time before February 23rd. When the two of you were married, where did you live?
When we were first married,
Yes.
we lived in a small apartment around the corner from my parents
In which city?
here, Brunswick.
How long have you and Greg lived in Brunswick together?
All of our life.
All your marriage?
Mhm.
Now you live in the same neighborhood where the event that we're here about today took place. Is that
Yes.
right?
Yes, ma'am.
And you were living there on February 23rd.
Yes, ma'am.
How long had you been living in that home in the Satilla Shores neighborhood at the time of February 23rd?
6.5 years.
Were you buying or renting that home?
Renting.
Who was your landlord?
Connie Scroggs.
On February 23rd, who was living at that home with you?
Travis, Lindsay, and Everett was there.
I want you to take a look at exhibits 12, 13, and 14 and tell me if you recognize those photographs.
I do.
I want to tender 12, 13, and 14, Your Honor.
No objection.
Who is that in exhibit 12, Lee?
Yes, Greg and Everett.
Everett is his grandson. About how old is Everett in that photo?
Gosh, I don't know. Maybe about 9 months to a year.
Now if you would turn to exhibit 13. What's in that photograph?
Greg and Everett?
Is Everett a little older there?
Yes, he is.
And now if you turn to exhibit 14.
That's Greg and Everett.
A little bit older there.
Yes.
The living arrangement, as I understand it from your previous testimony, is that Nicole, who is Everett's mother, and Travis, who is Everett's father, have a very cordial relationship so that Everett spends every other week at a house.
Right.
So a week with Dad over at Grandma and Grandpa's and a week with Mom.
Right.
Then back at Dad's and Grandma and Grandpa's.
Right.
Was that a living arrangement back in February that you look back to with happiness?
Yes.
How important a part of Greg's life is his grandson Everett?
He's number one. Most important.
Was he actively engaged in Everett's care?
He was. He sometimes he got him up. Got him to daycare because he was retired. so he got to get up and get him breakfast and get him settled. Sometimes he picked him up early. And when the COVID came about, he would keep him at home until Travis got there.
Well, Greg McMichael has raised his children, and how did he feel about having everyone back at home again?
It was stressful, but we had happy times.
How did he feel about having a 4-year-old in the house every other week?
He loved it.
So now, Lee, I want to talk about some things that are uncomfortable to talk about in a courtroom with people you don't know. But this is what we've got to do today. You were asked earlier about your financial situation.
Mm-hmm.
What money comes in every month, not the amounts, to cover your expenses?
My salary, Greg's pension, and he's gets Social Security.
You testified earlier that you're renting a home. Was there a financial problem that resulted in your having to rent and not buy?
Yes, during the crash, we ended up going bankruptcy and losing our home.
Is that why you told the government earlier, the state earlier, that you have literally no nest egg?
That's right.
Now here's another incredibly private thing that we're going to ask you about because it's important, and that's the stability of your marriage, Lee. You had your 37th anniversary just a couple of months ago. How would you describe the strength of your marriage to Greg McMichael?
Very strong.
What are you basing that on?
I'm basing it on our past. We've been through so much. A lot of hard times that we just get stronger every time we go through something.
So you think the trials that you've had over the last 37 years have strengthened you?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you mind telling us briefly some of those significant trials that instead of pulled you apart, drew you closer together?
Well, when Travis was 9 months old, I decided to go back to school, and Greg took care of Travis while I went back to college to get my nursing degree. He took him 50-50. When I graduated and had Lindsay, I worked straight nights, he worked days. So he was there at night, I was there. He got up, got him to school, I got him fed, and he made sure they were bathed and in bed for 10 years. And then, of course, losing both our parents was bad, but then I came down with cancer, 2003, I think it was. And I was sick for about 2 or 3 months, and he did everything. He took care of the kids. All I did was stay in bed and go to treatment. And he took care of the kids and did everything.
Was the bankruptcy another one of those stressors that you say
Yes.
instead of driving you apart brought you back closer?
It was.
You've continued to stay at the house in Satilla Shores.
Yes,
Do you know your neighbors pretty well?
very well.
For the most part, have your neighbors been supportive?
Yes,
Have you received threats?
yes.
How have you reacted to those threats so that you're comfortably safe?
Well, I've got security set up. I've got 2 dogs, a little yapper and a big boy, and I've got I turn them over to, if they're threats that warrant, I turn them over to the police and GBI.
When was Greg arrested?
May 7th, 2020.
Since that time, have you visited him?
Yes,
How often do you visit Greg?
every visiting day.
How
Twice a
often
week.
are you allowed to visit him?
Twice a week.
What days are those?
Saturday and Wednesday.
For how long?
15 minutes.
And you say you've attended all those visitations.
Yes, ma'am.
Are they contact visitations?
No,
Are
ma'am.
you able to touch each other?
No, ma'am.
How do you communicate?
With a phone and a plexiglass.
I want you to look at Exhibit 15 and tell me if you recognize that photograph.
Yes, I do.
Your Honor, I tender Defendant's Exhibit 15.
No objection.
Lee, who is in that picture?
Greg and Everett and Travis.
When you found that picture, was it at my direction?
Yes,
And what was my request for you?
What was the last picture you have of Greg that before he got arrested?
All right. And when you look at your husband, do you remember the date when you looked on your photograph?
I think this was April.
All right, April of 2020, and the arrest was May 7th. How does your husband compare physically to how he was in April of 2020? How does he compare now and appear to you?
Thinner, paler, weaker.
Well, let's talk about each of those. You say thinner. Are you aware of whether your husband has lost any weight in the 6 months he's been at the Glynn County Sheriff's
Yes,
Department?
ma'am.
How much weight?
About 45 pounds.
You say weaker. What do you see physically to explain how you believe he's
His
weaker?
body posture just looks,
You're going like this. Is that bent
yes,
over?
bent over, just body posture.
And you say his color is paler.
Yes, it is.
Are you aware of whether your husband, from the day of his arrest to today, has ever been taken outside
Yes,
since
ma'am.
he's been at the Glynn County Sheriff's Department?
He has,
When?
day before yesterday.
Is that the first time he was taken outside in the 6 months he was here?
Yes, ma'am.
The first time he saw the sunshine, the first time he got out of the jail?
It was raining.
Okay. And do you know how long he was allowed outside?
No, I don't.
You're a nurse. Your husband was a law enforcement officer and a district attorney's investigator. Both careers dedicated to helping people. Was that an important part of your decision making? And when you talk about the strength and stability of your marriage, that you are both in those helping professions?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you and Greg share the ups and downs and your accomplishments with each other?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you proud of his achievements as a law enforcement officer?
Very proud.
How about his accomplishments as a DA investigator?
Very proud.
And were you aware of some of the commendations, some of the recognition that he's received throughout the years for these accomplishments?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm now going to tender, Your Honor, exhibits 16 through 20 that have been provided to the state. These are the commendation and recognition that he's received in some of the major cases that he's worked.
No objection.
Thank you. If you would put up number 16, I want to point out, Your Honor, this is a letter to Eugene Rame. Is it Rame or Ramey? The chief of police in Glynn County back then?
Can't remember the case.
It's R-A-M-E. In September of 1985, a letter of commendation that was prepared by the chief of police. And I just want to note this language. Were it not for your determination, perseverance, and cooperative spirit, a violent criminal might still be at large in our community. Your use of restraint and common sense during the pursuit is well noted, and the citizens of Glynn County are indeed fortunate to have such a dedicated officer as yourself to rely upon in times of need. Exhibit 17 is from the Department of Navy to the Chief of Police Eugene Rame, recognizing the work that the Glynn County Police Department did in helping apprehend absentee and deserters in the Marine Corps, and asking the Chief of Police to note the pleasure that the Captain of the United States Marine Corps, D.L. White, has in sharing and providing the enclosed certificate of appreciation for the professional efforts put forth by Detective Greg J. McMichael, effecting the arrest and detainment of the Marine Corps absentee deserter. Number 18 is a February 2003 letter from the Department of Treasury, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, from Hugo Barrera, the special agent in charge, to the district attorney at that time, Stephen Kelly, thanking District Attorney Kelly for making available to ATF the services of Investigator McMichael. And I'll point out that ATF says Investigator McMichael provided outstanding assistance that was indispensable during the investigative phases of this case. His expertise and professional conduct displayed while working with the U.S. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, as well as his continued cooperation in our agent's absence, were exemplary. Please convey my appreciation to Investigator McMichael in his unwavering assistance and dedication to duty in removing this violent felon from our streets. Exhibit 19, a May 2003 letter from John Albert Dow III, attorney at law in Brunswick, to the Honorable Stephen Kelly, thanking letting the district attorney know that Mr. McMichael was an incredible assistance involving threats and threatening phone calls made to Mr. Dow's residence. He ends the letter by saying, "And Greg, please know that I'm supremely impressed with your investigative skill and professional demeanor."
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I tried not to object, but I believe she's on direct, so question and answer I think would probably be a better use of the time from the state's perspective. So I object to the form of the question or absence thereof.
I have no question, Your Honor. I'm just interlacing the exhibits that have already been authenticated in the middle of this direct examination.
At the time they're admitted, they're in, since we have a witness on the stand, let's get the testimony.
Very good, Your Honor. There were only one left, and that was number 20, and the court will have the opportunity to take a look at that. Ms. McMichael, you see Exhibit 21 in front of you. That would be, you see that? I think I left that with you.
You did.
Lynn County Police Department. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Do you, can you identify that document?
It's a separation of notice from County Board of Commissions.
All right. Tender Exhibit 21, Your Honor.
No objection.
That is the separation notice, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Meaning it's telling from the amount of time that your husband gave in service to Glynn County?
Yes,
Do you see the dates of beginning service and the dates of end service?
I do.
Will you read those?
11/1/1995 is the beginning, and the ending service is May 31st, 2019.
That's 24 years.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. McMichael, do you know of any time in the 38 years you've been with Greg McMichael that he has attacked or caused physical harm to anyone?
No, ma'am.
And since February 23rd, during the time he had it home and the time he's been in jail, has Greg McMichael ever said or done anything that made you concerned that if given the chance, he wouldn't be coming back for his trial?
No, ma'am.
Do you have an opinion about whether your husband poses any risk of flight?
He poses no risk of flight
Why do you think that's the case?
because he wants his day in court. He's not going to run from his responsibility, and he wants to be proven innocent.
I have no more questions.
Sure.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. McMichael, I will try very hard not to recover anything that we talked about this morning, though some of it now pertains to your husband versus Travis McMichael. So I do have some questions on that, and I think you understand that, correct? It goes without saying that the same stands true of your relationship with your husband as with your son. You're supportive of him and love him very much, correct?
That's correct.
And as with this morning, you confirmed for us that you don't know all of the facts of this case, just what's been told to you and what you may have seen in the media and otherwise, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And we had talked about the social media post by your daughter, Lindsay. That post was actually made with a picture of the crime scene while she was under your roof. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
Okay. Since we're again talking about money and about income sources, I want to ask a little bit about the three total sources of income that you identified: salary, correct?
Yes,
Pension,
yes,
and that's defendant's, Greg McMichael's pension, correct?
right.
And then Social Security. Tell me about the GoFundMe page that's been set up for
We don't have a
support.
GoFundMe page.
You do not?
We do not.
Okay. Are you aware of any supporters that have set up a GoFundMe page on your
I
behalf?
am not aware of any supporters setting up GoFundMe page.
Okay. You were asked about internal complaints and your husband's retirement. You know that on 2 occasions his post-certification lapsed because of his failure to keep up with what his requirements were, correct?
I am aware of that, yes.
Okay. And in fact, the reason that he left the service of the Glenn County District Attorney's Office was in lieu of being fired. Is that correct?
No, that is not correct.
I don't assume that you have access to the post records, that being the Police Officer Standard and Training Council, by chance, do you? Have you seen any of those?
I've seen the letters that he's gotten.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about neurologists. You mentioned that for the first time, I think, this afternoon. What is the neurological condition that's of concern that requires your husband to see a neurologist?
He had a stroke.
Okay. All right. So that's related to the heart conditions as well.
Well, it may be, it may not be.
Okay. Regardless of what that neurological condition is, you agree that your husband does have the capacity and does know the difference between right and wrong.
He does.
Okay. The bankruptcy that you had mentioned for your family, when was that you had to declare bankruptcy?
I cannot remember. It was in, it's when the crash hit, 2000, I don't know.
All right, that's
I'm
fine.
not
Are you out of bankruptcy now, you and
We
your
are.
family?
We
Okay.
are.
So you've left bankruptcy.
We have.
Do you recall when that was?
Yes, that was after we got the rental house. So that was probably 5 years ago.
All right. Since it was brought up on direct, I want to delve into it just briefly. You mentioned the fact that you and your family had received some threats. Is that correct?
Yes,
When those threats were received, you did reach out to the state through the GBI and through police to have them investigated, correct?
absolutely.
And the GBI and police took it upon themselves to investigate those threats just as they've investigated this case.
I guess.
In addition to the 2 times that you visit with your husband, Greg McMichael, a week, you've had a number of phone conversations with him, just as you've had conversations with Travis, correct?
Of course.
Staying on the health conditions here, having observed your husband during these visits and having talked to him, during any of the visits that you and your husband have had with his doctor, were there concerns expressed about his weight and how that might impact his heart condition? Was he
No.
asked to lose weight?
What is his weight?
Yeah, no. Was he asked to lose weight by his medical professionals, by
I
his
don't
doctor?
remember if he was or not.
I want to talk to you about phone calls. You and your husband discussed the idea that character witnesses might be called on his behalf as part of this bond hearing. Do you recall that?
I don't recall, but I got it.
You know who Mario Morales is?
Yes, I do.
Okay, there was a particular call where you told your husband you thought it was a bad idea for Mario to be called as a character witness.
I did.
Okay, so let's start first by identifying who he is. He's a former Glenn County police officer,
Right.
correct? And how is it that your husband and you know who Mario...
I object. I received a very specific list based on the court's pre-hearing order of Greg McMichael's jail calls, State's Exhibit number 12. And there were, I think, 10 of them. I'll pull back and look. This, whatever Mr. Evans is talking about now, is not on that list.
I'm not tendering that jail call, Your Honor, so it wouldn't be on that list. And she's acknowledged the conversation. I'm just going to talk to her about the substance of it.
considered as a witness. I'm just not seeing how this is ever going to play into the 4 Ayala factors.
I've been given a list that includes Mario Morales as a potential witness that would be called during this bond hearing. I know that she and her husband had conversations about that from our investigation. I'm asking her about one of those conversations.
I've got tons of notice of bond evidence. I had just, after probably time to say, I did actually bring down hard copies of the and what you're referring to is the defendant's notice of bond evidence. 5 witness is Mario Morales.
Correct.
Your Honor, there has been no Mario Morales who's testified.
Witnesses.
He's not a witness list. There's people on that witness list that are not going to be called. That was a list of who could be called. I suppose that the state could recall Ms. McMichael if they wanted to question her after a witness testified to see if something was true or false.
I'm going to permit it. And he's on he
Yes.
is on the list. That was 5. That's right.
My question was regarding Mr. Mario Morales, and I think you indicated that he was a former Glenn County police officer, correct?
Yes,
Did he work with your husband when your husband was employed there?
he did.
You came to know him as well through that relationship, that
Yes.
work relationship. You told your husband that you thought it was a bad idea for Mario to be called as part of this bond hearing. Why is that?
Because I was worried about with the threats that I got and the harassment our friends have had, that with his job, that he may lose his job.
Is Mr. Morales still with Glenn County Police Department, or
No,
are
he
you
is
aware that
not.
he's no longer there?
He's no longer there.
So that risk of employment loss doesn't necessarily apply anymore in terms
Yes.
of Glenn County.
Not Glenn County, but it does apply.
I want to talk about some jail calls, some of which we covered on Travis. Now I need to talk about some of your calls with your husband. Specifically, I want to talk about May 16th. Do you remember having a discussion with your husband about Lindsay and the advice that your husband gave you that you needed to have her delete her social media?
I do.
And specifically, he told you they're going to go back and look at what she posted. Do you remember that?
I don't remember him saying that.
And he made a distinction between merely closing them out and actually deleting, bless you, deleting the social media. Do you remember that discussion?
I remember him wanting her off of social media, yes.
All right. Did you, in fact, follow his request and ask your daughter to delete social media?
She was already deleted from social media.
Let me direct your attention to the next day, May the 17th. There was a discussion between you and your husband during which your husband says, did they get my account killed? Is that correct? You remember that?
Yes,
When you're talking about getting my account killed, is that in reference to social media and phones?
to phone, social media.
Who is Lee that you reference in that phone call?
Lee is the investigator with the defense.
Okay, so was it Lee that you were working with to get that account killed as your...
No, Lee had the phone. He was not killing the account.
I got you. All right. Just 1 minute. Thank you, Max.
Ms. McMichael, how did you feel when you discovered that your daughter had posted a picture of the scene on her Facebook page?
Horrified
Why?
and disgusted. It was a bad judgment call, and she has been tormented and harassed ever since.
How did your husband, Greg McMichael, feel about what she did?
Object to speculation.
Had you and Greg discussed how he felt about what his daughter
Yes,
did?
yes.
And what did he convey
He
to
was
you?
furious.
You were asked whether your husband was about to be fired from the district attorney's office. Will you let us know why that is not the case?
Because we had planned retirement a year in advance. He had a retirement date already set. My husband did not have arrest powers that last few months So what he did was he worked in the office between the police department and in Camden and the DA's office until he retired. He never arrested anyone anyway in his duties.
Do you know whether a DA investigator even has to be a post-certified officer?
I don't think so.
All right. And so do you understand that this was an agreement that he and his boss reached for him to finish out the year that he wanted before he retired?
Absolutely.
Had you ever heard from his boss or from him or from anyone before Mr. Evans the phrase, instead of being fired?
I never heard that before. He planned his retirement.
The neurologist, tell us about the stroke. As his wife and being intimately familiar with it, and as a nurse, what did that stroke do to him?
He's got a little bit of memory loss.
What part of his body did it initially hit?
It hit his. There was really initially no signs, but then he woke up and he could not see out of his. I think it was his right eye. Part he could see.
And is that what the neurologist told you, where it was impacted?
He had a stroke in the eye itself, plus a small stroke in his occipital lobe, but that didn't have anything to do with the eyesight. That was
Right. And you're pointing to the back for
Yes,
us
the back,
non-nurses.
not occipital,
All
it's
right,
the back.
occipital lobe. All right. Your concerns about Mario Morales, which I still cannot see the relevance of. Have you testified honestly as to why it is you were concerned about Mario? Had he conveyed those concerns to you?
He did not convey them to me. I convey them because of the way we've had friends lose jobs. And I know his position is pretty sensitive, and I worry about him being associated would lose his job.
And as a nurse, and after, based as well on your meetings with your husband's doctor, what risks are they that a person who has suffered a stroke will suffer another one? Are they increased?
Yes.
I have no more questions.
No, sir.
Maybe we step down.
Yes.
Oh, wait, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, yeah. She's not, we would ask that she not be excused. We still have.
Still have her under subpoena? Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Could you just step out of the courtroom, and you need to remain available.
Your Honor, defense calls Len Jordahl.
Len Jordahl.
Grand jury, Brett?
Yes, ma'am. I wasn't sure. I was trying to figure out what you meant by that.
Oh, I think those were handed up to the court.
So 16 is the Boone County Police Department letter, 17 is Department of
Oh,
Farm Treasurer.
no, look at that, I blamed it on you, Your Honor.
First time was a letter from the
And you know, my husband would say, oh, I'm used to that. You know, I'm glad. It's so unusual that we have all these.
figuring out the flow here. I'll get you drops and okay.
Oh, very good. Thank you.
Where's the trailer?
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you shall give to the court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Mr. Jordan?
Yes,
I'm over here. If you would introduce yourself to the court and tell us how you spell your last name.
Linton Jordahl, Jordahl.
Mr. Jordan, where do you live? Not the actual address, but what city do you live in?
Brunswick, Georgia.
How long have you been living in Brunswick?
With the exception of a detail to Washington, D.C. for 4 years, I've lived there since 1977.
Family from around here too?
Yes,
And did you raise your family here?
yes.
What do you do for a living?
Well, I'm retired now. I'm a retired federal employee.
Can you go back to the beginning of your career as in the federal sector?
Well, I started in the U.S. Marshal Service.
When did you start there?
I started in 1970.
What did you do in the marshal's office?
I was a deputy U.S. Marshal.
For how many years?
Well, in total, counting the transfer back here, for 15 years.
As a U.S. Marshal, basically, what were your duties?
Court security, serving process, warrants, witness protection, civil disturbance.
And then at some point, did you have some deployment situations? Were you deployed at all or involved?
Well, I've deployed to situations involving civil unrest several times, witness protection details, fugitive investigation details in various cities around the country.
And was that all in your capacity as a U.S. Marshal?
Yes.
That was your beginning in law enforcement. After the U.S. Marshals, what did you do?
Well, after I transferred to Federal Law Enforcement Training Center with the Marshal Service, and I was injured in the line of duty in 1982. And then I worked for the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center as an instructor for a few years. Then I came back to a criminal investigation position with the U.S. Forest Service.
What sort of courses were you teaching?
Behavioral sciences and enforcement operations.
So you did that until, bring us a little bit forward here.
Well, I taught at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center until approximately 1993. Then I went with the U.S. Forest Service. I transferred to Washington, D.C., and I was the Assistant Director for Operations for Law Enforcement and Investigations until I transferred back to FLETC in 1997. 1997, I finished up as a representative of the U.S. Forest Service at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, and I retired in 2000.
And then you stopped retiring, is that right?
I stopped retiring, and I worked as a part-time doing security clearances for various government agencies to the present.
How do you do that?
Well, I go out and interview people and talk to people, pull records, so that they can get a national security clearance.
Do you know Greg McMichael?
Yes, I do.
Do you recall how you met him?
Vaguely.
Can you tell us that?
Well, approximately 1978 or 79, the late 1970s, I met him either as a member of the local dive club here, scuba diving club, or in his official capacity, because at that time there had been a double homicide on Jekyll Island, and the Glynn County court system did not have the state-of-the-art walk-through metal detectors at the time, and he spoke to me about finding some Marshal Service equipment that we could use for that high-threat trial.
And did the two of you work together on getting that all ready to go?
He was just a point of contact, and he made the references, and because he likes to help people, and I don't think it was even his responsibility, but he was kind of the point of contact to getting the equipment down to the court.
So having met each other in a law enforcement capacity, collaterally, and then having a mutual interest in scuba diving, did those two interests come together to create a friendship?
Well, they created a friendship, a professional and a friendship between families.
Tell us about that.
Well, my children's surrogate grandparents lived just down the street from Greg McMichael's. So when I take the kids over to visit with their surrogate grandparents, now deceased, Greg knew the family also, so he would come by and visit, and then his children would come by also at various times, about 3 or 4 times a year.
In the period of time, and it sounds like it's a short period of time, that your work as a U.S. Marshal crossed over and intersected with Greg's work here at the Glynn County, did you see or sense any deviation from protocol, from procedure when you were working with him?
Not at all.
Did you see anything different than that? How did you view his attention to detail and his reliability to follow the rules and the regulations?
Well, from my experience, he was a professional law enforcement officer. He was friendly. He followed all known, being from an outside agency, he followed all the protocols that I would expect that would be followed by Glynn County.
Did you maintain your friendship after this professional meeting and your families getting together? How often would you say, tell us about the development of your friendship over the last, it looks like 30 some years?
This is sporadic. It just depended on my travel and his work. But approximately 3 to 4 times a year, we would meet either at the surrogate grandfather's house, or I visited his house in Brunswick, Georgia, a couple of times.
And in all those years and the sporadic visits, especially with your relationship and your foundation in Brunswick, had you ever heard around Brunswick, around Glynn County, any disparaging comments about Greg McMichael's ability to deal with any sort of person on his job or socially? Rich people, poor people, women, men, white, black. Did you ever hear that there was a problem that Greg would have in working with people that were different than him?
Never.
Have you continued to keep in touch with the McMichael family while Greg's been in jail?
No, I haven't.
And have you taken it upon yourself to want to help Greg in his efforts to be bonded out?
Yes.
Can I talk with you about that? You understand that a bond is oftentimes held by a security, and that some individuals can put up security based on the level of certainty they have that they're not going to lose their property. So have you made some offers to us, to the family, about your willingness to do such a thing?
I've made that offer.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, I have, when this incident first happened, I realized that this sort of thing would come up, and I was just waiting for the bail to be mentioned. And I spoke to my wife, and we agreed that we would sign over some rental property that I had, just as a bond.
And ballpark, did you look up an assessment, equity-wise, of the property that you would be willing to put up for his security?
Yes, the assessment was $108,000.
Did you say 108 or 108?
It was 108.
Now, Mr. Jordahl, it seems to go without saying, but I'm going to have to say it. Do you have any concerns that Greg McMichael will flee if he is released on bond?
Absolutely not.
Do you have any concerns that he will not show up for court when ordered to do so?
I have no concerns.
And is your willingness to stake that feeling, stake your property on the certainty of that feeling, does that tell us anything about the certainty with which you have that opinion?
Well, I'm certain of his character and the way he's dealt with people and dealt with me over the years. I've never seen anything negative, never seen anything derogatory or demeaning towards other people. Just a professional law enforcement person.
And even though this is such a serious case, what makes you so comfortable in knowing that he'll be back in court when he needs to for his trial?
Well, I know him well enough to make that decision.
Thank you. No more questions.
Mr. Jordahl, my name is Jesse Evans. I'm a prosecutor with the state of Georgia. I want to talk to you about your testimony. I don't have a lot to ask you, but you started off knowing defendant merely as a point of contact for some law enforcement function involving your work with the Marshal Service. That's my understanding.
Well, it's a vague recollection because two things happened during that time frame in the late 70s. One was the need for a sophisticated walk-through metal detector here, and the other was my association with the dive club. So that's when I first met him.
Okay. So you're not precisely certain which of those two led to the relationship?
I cannot remember exactly which one during the time frame.
Fair enough. Regardless, you since solidified your relationship with the McMichael's family, correct?
Yes.
And you are here as a supporter of Greg McMichael's and his family, correct?
Yes.
Admittedly, you do not know the specific facts of the state's case against Greg or Travis McMichael, other than perhaps what you've heard on the media or what some family member has told you, correct?
That's correct.
Would you agree with this assertion as a former law enforcement officer? Good character never excuses bad or criminal conduct. You agree with that?
I agree with that.
Let's talk about this property that you have. You said $108,000 in equity in that property?
That's what it's assessed at.
Okay. Is it encumbered in any way? Is there a mortgage or anything like that?
There is a mortgage in the amount of $37,000.
Okay. And is that property here in Glenn County?
Yes, Brunswick, Glenn County.
Brunswick. This is your property?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you're willing to put your property up for defendant Greg McMichael if he's granted a bond based on your relationship with him over the years?
Yes, sir.
That's your testimony?
Yes.
Okay.
No more questions, Your Honor. May he be released?
Yes, thanks, sir. You may step down.
Your Honor. Your Honor. Come again. Yes, sir.